I never thought I'd find myself standing in front of a building that looked like it had been plucked from a fever dream. But that's exactly where I was on a gray, rain-slicked morning in late October. The Museum of Unexplained Artifacts didn't advertise. It didn't need to. Word of mouth, whispered rumors, and the occasional cryptic post on forgotten corners of the internet were enough to keep its doors open. Some people said it moved locations every year, like a traveling circus for the strange and the lost. Others claimed it had always been there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right kind of visitor. I'd heard about it from a friend of a friend, the kind of person who collects stories the way others collect stamps or rare coins. He told me, if you want to see the world's secrets, go to the museum. But don't expect answers. Expect questions. I arrived just as the city was waking up, the streets still empty except for the occasional delivery truck and a few early risers huddled under umbrellas. The museum's facade was unremarkable: red brick, soot-stained windows, a faded sign that simply read MUA in peeling gold letters. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd walk right past it. But I knew, or at least I thought I did. The door creaked open with a sound like a sigh, and I stepped inside. The air was cool and dry, tinged with the scent of old paper, wax, and something metallic. The lobby was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from a chandelier made of mismatched glass bottles, each one glowing with a different colored light. There was no ticket booth, no receptionist, just a small wooden box on a pedestal with a handwritten note. Admission, pay what you think it's worth. No refunds, no exceptions. I dropped a crumpled bill into the box and waited, half expecting someone to appear and usher me inside. But the silence stretched on, thick and expectant. I took a deep breath and walked forward, my footsteps muffled by a threadbare carpet patterned with strange, looping symbols. The first exhibit was just ahead, behind a pane of glass, so clean it was almost invisible. It was a simple object, a child's spinning top, carved from bone and inlaid with tiny chips of turquoise. The placard read, "The top that never stops." According to the description, it had been found in a collapsed farmhouse in rural Hungary, still spinning on the floor after the roof caved in. No one knew how long it had been turning. Some said it was cursed, others that it was a gift from a forgotten god of play. The museum claimed it had been spinning, uninterrupted, for over a century. I leaned closer, watching the top's hypnotic motion. It didn't wobble or slow, just spun in perfect silence, defying gravity and logic. That I moved on, my curiosity sharpening with every step. The next case held a faded photograph, sepia-toned and water-stained. It showed a group of people standing in front of a train, their faces blurred beyond recognition. The caption was brief: "The passengers who never arrived." The story went that the train had left its station in 1912, bound for a city that no longer existed. It never reached its destination. The tracks were found twisted into impossible shapes, the carriages empty except for the photograph, propped on a seat as if waiting for someone to claim it. No one ever did. As I wandered deeper into the museum, the exhibits grew stranger. There was a violin that played itself, its strings moving in the absence of any visible hand. A pocket watch that ran backward, its ticking echoing in the quiet like a heartbeat in reverse. A pair of shoes that, according to the placard, had walked from Paris to Moscow on their own, leaving a trail of scorched earth in their wake. Each artifact was accompanied by a story, some detailed, others little more than a question mark. Who made these things? Where did they come from? Why did they exist? I found myself drawn to a display in the center of the main hall. It was a glass dome, inside of which floated a single black feather. The sign read, "The feather that fell up." The story was simple. A hunter in the Amazon had shot a bird he'd never seen before. When he plucked a feather, it slipped from his fingers and rose into the sky, vanishing into the clouds. Years later, the feather reappeared, drifting down from the ceiling of a church in Lisbon during a midnight mass. No one could explain how it had traveled halfway across the world or why it refused to obey gravity. The feather hovered in the dome, spinning slowly, as if searching for a way out. That I paused, letting the strangeness of it all wash over me. There was something intoxicating about the museum, a sense that the world was bigger, weirder, and more mysterious than I'd ever imagined. I'd come looking for answers, but all I found were more questions, each one more tantalizing than the last. A soft sound caught my attention, a whisper, barely audible, like the rustle of pages in a library. I turned and saw a figure standing in the shadows, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. He was tall and thin, dressed in a suit that looked a century out of date. His eyes were sharp, almost luminous in the dim light. "First time?" he asked, his voice low and even. I nodded, unsure whether to be relieved or unnerved by his presence. He smiled, a small, knowing curve of his lips. Most people don't make it past the first room. The museum has a way of sorting its visitors. I glanced back at the spinning top, still turning in its case. "What happens if you leave early?" He shrugged. "You forget. The mind protects itself. But if you stay, if you really look, you might remember things you didn't know you'd forgotten." He stepped forward, his shoes making no sound on the carpet. "Would you like a tour?" I hesitated, then nodded. There was something about him, an air of authority, or maybe just the confidence of someone who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything. He led me down a narrow corridor lined with cabinets of curiosities. Each one was filled with objects that seemed to defy explanation. A compass that spun wildly no matter which way you turned it. A mirror that reflected a room I couldn't see, filled with people who weren't there. A book with no title, its pages blank except for a single word written in a language I didn't recognize. "Every artifact here has a story," the guide said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Some are true, some are lies. Most are both." I stopped in front of a case containing a small, battered notebook. The cover was stained and torn, the pages filled with cramped handwriting. The label read, "The Diary of the Last Cartographer." According to the description, the diary belonged to a man who claimed to have mapped the edges of the world. His entries grew more frantic as he described landscapes that shifted and changed, cities that appeared and vanished overnight, rivers that flowed uphill. The final entry was a single sentence: "The map is not the territory. The territory is not the world." I looked up at the guide. "Do you believe any of this?" He smiled again, a little sadder this time. "Belief is a luxury. Here, we deal in possibilities." We moved on, the exhibits growing more unsettling. There was a jar filled with what looked like ordinary marbles, but the sign claimed they were the eyes of the forgotten. Supposedly, anyone who looked into the jar for too long would see faces they'd never met, lives they'd never lived. I glanced at the marbles, half expecting to see my own reflection, but all I saw were shifting colors, swirling like oil on water. In another case, a pair of gloves rested on a velvet cushion. The label read, "The Hands That Remember." The story was that anyone who wore the gloves would find themselves able to perform tasks they'd never learned, playing the piano, speaking a dead language, picking locks with impossible speed. But the effect was temporary, and when it faded, the wearer would forget not only the new skill, but something else, an old memory, a favorite song, the face of a loved one. The gloves were beautiful, but I felt a chill just looking at them. The guide paused in front of a door at the end of the corridor. It was made of dark wood, carved with symbols that seemed to shift when I looked away. He turned to me, his expression serious. "Some rooms are not for everyone," he said. "You can choose to go in, or you can turn back. But if you go forward, you might not come out the same." I hesitated, the weight of his words settling on my shoulders. But curiosity won out. I nodded, and he opened the door. The room beyond was circular, lined with shelves that reached up into darkness. Each shelf was filled with boxes, jars, and bundles wrapped in cloth. In the center of the room stood a pedestal on which rested a single object, a key, old and tarnished, its bow shaped like an eye. "This is the heart of the museum," the guide said softly. The key to nowhere. I stepped closer, drawn by a force I couldn't name. The key seemed to hum with energy, vibrating just above the surface of the pedestal. The sign beside it was simple: do not touch, do not ask, do not seek. I looked at the guide, questions burning in my mind. He shook his head. Some things are better left unexplained. We stood in silence for a moment, the air thick with possibility. I felt as if I were standing on the edge of a precipice, one step away from falling into a world I couldn't understand. Finally, the guide turned and led me back through the museum, retracing our steps past the gloves, the marbles, the diary, the mirror. Each artifact seemed changed, as if it had absorbed something from me. A glance, a thought, a fragment of belief. As we reached the lobby, the guide paused. Most people leave with more questions than answers, he said. But that's the point. The world is full of mysteries. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is let them be. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of peace. I'd come looking for explanations, but what I found was something deeper, a sense of wonder, a reminder that not everything needs to be understood. That I stepped out into the rain, the city unchanged, the world still turning. But I carried the museum with me, its secrets tucked away in the corners of my mind, waiting to be rediscovered. The rain had picked up, drumming a steady rhythm on the sidewalk as I stood outside the museum, my mind still tangled in the web of stories and impossibilities I'd just witnessed. I glanced back at the building, half expecting it to have vanished, but it remained, solid and silent, its windows reflecting the gray sky. I pulled my coat tighter and started walking, the city's familiar noises slowly filtering back into my awareness. But the museum lingered in my thoughts, each artifact a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit, each story a thread leading somewhere I couldn't see. I found myself retracing my steps, replaying the guide's words in my mind. Belief is a luxury. Here, we deal in possibilities. What did that mean, really? Was the museum a collection of oddities? Or was it something more, a place where the boundaries between reality and imagination blurred, where the impossible became possible, if only for a moment? As I walked, I realized I wasn't ready to let go. The world outside felt flatter, less vibrant, as if the colors had faded just a little. I needed to know more. I needed to understand. So, against my better judgment, I turned around and headed back toward the museum, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and dread. The door was still unlocked, the lobby unchanged. The chandelier of glass bottles cast its kaleidoscopic light across the walls, and the wooden box still sat on its pedestal, waiting for another offering. I hesitated, then dropped another bill inside, half expecting the guide to reappear. But the museum was silent, the only sound my own breathing. That I wandered back into the main hall, drawn to the exhibits I'd already seen. The spinning top was still turning, the feathers still floating, the violin still playing its ghostly tune. But something felt different. The air was heavier, charged with anticipation. I moved slowly, my senses heightened, as if the museum itself was watching me. I stopped in front of a new display, a glass case containing a single, unremarkable stone. The placard read, "The stone that remembers." According to the description, the stone had been found in the ruins of an ancient city, buried beneath layers of ash and bone. When held, it was said to show the holder flashes of the past, moments of joy, sorrow, and everything in between. Some claimed it was a fragment of a lost civilization, others that it was a piece of the world's memory, preserved against the ravages of time. I pressed my hand against the glass, half expecting to feel a jolt of electricity, but there was nothing, just the cool, smooth surface beneath my fingers. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the stone was watching me, waiting for someone brave enough to pick it up and remember. I moved on, my footsteps echoing in the empty hall. The next exhibit was a collection of letters, each one written in a different language, some familiar, others indecipherable. The sign read, "The letters that arrived too late." The story was that these letters had been sent to loved ones, friends, and strangers, but had never reached their destinations. Instead, they had appeared in the museum, their messages unread, their secrets preserved. I scanned the letters, my eyes catching on a few words here and there. Love, regret, hope, goodbye. I wondered what stories they held, what lives they had touched, what might have changed if they had arrived on time. As I wandered, I noticed a door I hadn't seen before, tucked away in a corner of the hall. It was small and unassuming, painted the same color as the wall, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. I hesitated, then reached for the handle, half expecting it to be locked. But it turned easily, and the door swung open with a soft creak. The room beyond was unlike any I'd seen so far. It was filled with light, the walls lined with shelves of glass jars, each one containing a different object: a lock of hair, a scrap of fabric, a dried flower, a broken watch. The air was thick with the scent of lavender and old books, and the only sound was the faint ticking of a clock somewhere out of sight. In the center of the room stood a table, on which rested a single, ornate box. The box was carved from dark wood, inlaid with silver and mother of pearl, its surface covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as I looked at them. The sign beside it read, "The Box of Forgotten Promises." I reached out, my fingers tracing the patterns on the lid. The box was warm to the touch, almost pulsing with a life of its own. I hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside, I found a collection of small, seemingly insignificant objects: a ring, a key, a faded photograph, a scrap of paper with a single word written on it: "Remember." Each item felt heavy with meaning, as if it carried the weight of 1,000 broken promises, 1,000 forgotten dreams. That I closed the box, my heart aching with a sadness I couldn't explain. I realized then that the museum wasn't just a collection of oddities. It was a repository of memory, a place where the lost and the forgotten were preserved, waiting to be rediscovered. I left the room, my mind swirling with questions. Who collected these artifacts? Who decided what was worth preserving? And what happened to the stories that were never told, the mysteries that remained unsolved? As I wandered back into the main hall, I noticed the guide standing by the entrance, watching me with that same inscrutable expression. "Find what you were looking for?" he asked, and I shook my head. "I'm not sure. I think I found more questions than answers." He nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less. "That's the way of things here. The museum isn't about answers. It's about possibilities." He gestured for me to follow, and I did, my curiosity outweighing my uncertainty. He led me to a staircase I hadn't noticed before, hidden behind a tapestry depicting a map of the stars. The stairs creaked under our weight, the air growing colder as we descended. At the bottom, we emerged into a vast, dimly lit chamber. The walls were lined with shelves, each one filled with artifacts stranger than the last: a clock that ran on moonlight, a mask that changed faces when no one was looking, a lantern that cast shadows in the shape of forgotten dreams. In the center of the room stood a large, circular table, on which rested a map unlike any I'd ever seen. The map was alive, its surface shifting and changing, continents drifting, oceans swirling, cities appearing and disappearing in the blink of an eye. "This is the map of possibilities," the guide said, his voice reverent. "It shows not what is, but what could be. Every choice, every chance, every path not taken." I stared at the map, mesmerized by its constant motion. I saw glimpses of worlds that might have been, cities built on clouds, forests of glass, rivers of fire. I saw myself, standing at a crossroads, unsure which path to take. The guide placed a hand on my shoulder. "Every artifact in this museum is a possibility, a story that could have gone another way, a life that might have been lived differently. The world is full of mysteries, and sometimes the greatest mystery is what might have been." I nodded, feeling a sense of awe and humility. The museum wasn't just a place of wonder. It was a reminder of the infinite complexity of the world, the endless branching of choices and consequences. That we left the chamber, climbing the stairs back to the main hall. The guide paused at the top, turning to face me. "Most people come here looking for answers," he said. But the real gift of the museum is the questions it leaves you with. The world is not a puzzle to be solved, but a story to be lived. I thanked him, my mind buzzing with possibilities. I wandered through the museum one last time, lingering over the exhibits that had caught my attention: the spinning top, the feather, the gloves, the box of forgotten promises. Each one felt like a doorway, a glimpse into a world just out of reach. As I left the museum, the rain had stopped, the sky clearing to reveal a sliver of sunlight. The city felt different, as if I were seeing it for the first time. The ordinary had become extraordinary, the mundane charged with possibility. I realized then that the true magic of the museum wasn't in the artifacts themselves, but in the way they changed the way I saw the world. Every object, every story, was a reminder that the world is full of mysteries, waiting to be discovered. That I walked home in a daze, my mind replaying the stories I'd heard, the artifacts I'd seen. I knew I'd never see the world the same way again. The museum had opened my eyes to the strangeness and beauty of the everyday, the hidden wonders that lurk just beneath the surface of reality. That night, I dreamed of the museum. I wandered its halls, lost among the artifacts, each one whispering secrets in a language I couldn't understand. I woke with a sense of longing, a desire to return, to uncover more mysteries, to ask more questions.
In the days that followed, I found myself noticing things I'd never seen before: a coin on the sidewalk, glinting in the sunlight; a bird perched on a windowsill, watching me with curious eyes; a scrap of paper caught in the branches of a tree, fluttering like a message from another world. The museum had changed me, made me more attentive, more curious, more open to the possibilities that surrounded me. I started keeping a journal, recording the oddities and coincidences I encountered, the moments of wonder that punctuated my days. I found myself seeking out the strange and the unexplained, drawn to the mysteries that others overlooked. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail, addressed in a handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a single sentence: "The world is full of wonders if you know where to look." There was no signature, no return address, just the message and a small, pressed flower, a violet, perfectly preserved. I smiled, tucking the letter into my journal. I didn't know who had sent it, but I felt a kinship with them, a fellow seeker, a fellow believer in the magic of the unexplained. As the weeks passed, I found myself returning to the museum in my thoughts, replaying the stories, the artifacts, the questions. I knew I would go back someday, when I was ready for more mysteries, more possibilities. For now, I was content to live in the world the museum had shown me, a world where anything was possible, where every object, every moment, was a doorway to wonder. The days grew shorter, the air colder, and the city's edges blurred into the early darkness of winter. Yet the museum's influence lingered, a quiet undercurrent in my life. I found myself drawn to the places where the ordinary and the extraordinary overlapped. The antique shop with clocks that never chimed, the alleyway where shadows seemed to move against the light, the old library where books sometimes rearranged themselves overnight. I became a collector of small mysteries, a chronicler of the unexplained. One evening, as I walked home beneath a sky streaked with violet and gold, I passed a street musician playing a tune I'd never heard before. The melody was haunting, familiar and strange all at once, and for a moment I was back in the museum, standing before the violin that played itself. I dropped a coin into the musician's case, and he looked up, his eyes bright with recognition. He nodded, as if we shared a secret, and the music shifted, weaving in echoes of the stories I'd carried with me. That night, I sat by my window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. I thought about the guide, his words echoing in my mind. The world is not a puzzle to be solved, but a story to be lived. I wondered how many others had walked the museum's halls, how many had left changed, how many had become seekers in their own right. I decided to write a letter to the museum, unsure if it would ever be read. I poured out my questions, my gratitude, my longing for more.
I sealed the envelope and addressed it simply: Museum of Unexplained Artifacts, City Unknown. I left it on my desk, unsure what to do next. The next morning, the letter was gone. In its place was a small, brass key, old, tarnished, and unmistakably familiar. Its bow was shaped like an eye, just like the key I'd seen in the heart of the museum. I turned it over in my hand, feeling its weight, its promise. There was no note, no instructions, just the key and the certainty that it was meant for me. I slipped the key into my pocket and set out, following a path I didn't know I remembered. The city seemed to guide me, its streets bending and shifting, leading me through neighborhoods I'd never visited, past buildings that felt both new and ancient. I walked for hours, the key growing warmer in my hand, until I found myself standing once again before the museum. This time, the door opened before I could knock. The guide was waiting, his expression softer, almost welcoming. "You came back," he said, as if he'd been expecting me all along. I nodded, holding out the key. "I think this is yours." He shook his head. "It's yours now. The museum chooses its keepers." I hesitated, unsure what that meant. "What do I do with it?" He smiled, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "You open doors. You ask questions. You keep the mysteries alive." He led me inside, the familiar scent of wax and old paper wrapping around me like a cloak. The exhibits were the same, yet different. New artifacts had appeared, old ones had vanished, the stories shifting and evolving with each visit. The spinning top was gone, replaced by a chessboard with pieces carved from bone and glass. The feather that fell up had been joined by a stone that hummed with a low, musical note. The violin was silent, its bow resting gently on the strings. The guide led me to a new room, one I hadn't seen before. The walls were lined with mirrors, each one reflecting a different version of myself: older, younger, laughing, crying, standing in places I'd never been. In the center of the room was a table on which rested a single, blank book. "This is the book of unwritten stories," the guide said. "Every visitor leaves a mark, whether they know it or not. The museum is shaped by those who walk its halls, by the questions they ask, the mysteries they carry." He handed me a pen, its barrel carved with the same shifting symbols I'd seen on the box of forgotten promises. "Write your story," he said, "or write your questions. The museum will remember." I sat at the table, the mirrors watching, the book waiting. I hesitated, unsure where to begin. But as I touched pen to paper, the words flowed, memories of the artifacts I'd seen, the stories I'd heard, the questions that still haunted me. That I wrote about the spinning top, the feather, the gloves, the map of possibilities. I wrote about the guide, the musician, the letter that vanished. I wrote about the key, the sense of wonder, the longing for answers. As I wrote, the room seemed to shift around me. The mirrors flickered, showing glimpses of other visitors, other stories, other mysteries. I saw a woman tracing the patterns on the box of forgotten promises, a child staring in awe at the map of possibilities, an old man weeping over the letters that arrived too late. Each story was unique, yet all were connected, woven together by the museum's silent, watchful presence. When I finished, I closed the book and looked up. The guide was gone, the room empty except for me and the mirrors. I stood, the key heavy in my pocket, and made my way back through the museum, the exhibits whispering their secrets as I passed the door. I paused, looking back one last time. The museum was silent, its mysteries intact, its stories waiting for the next visitor. I stepped outside, the city bright and alive, the world full of possibilities. In the weeks that followed, I found myself drawn to the unexplained, the overlooked, the mysterious. I visited old bookstores, searching for volumes that didn't exist. I wandered through flea markets, looking for objects that hummed with hidden stories. I listened to the city's whispers, the secrets carried on the wind. That I met others like me, seekers, collectors, believers in the magic of the unexplained. We shared stories, traded artifacts, pieced together the fragments of a world that was stranger and more beautiful than we'd ever imagined. Some had visited the museum, others had only heard rumors, but all were united by a sense of wonder, a hunger for mystery. One night, I received another letter, this one written in a careful, looping script. "The museum is always open to those who seek," it read. "The key is yours. The story is yours. Keep asking questions." I smiled, tucking the letter into my journal. I knew I would return to the museum again and again, each visit revealing new mysteries, new possibilities. The world was full of wonders, and I was determined to find them all. As winter deepened, I found comfort in the museum's lessons. I learned to embrace uncertainty, to find beauty in the unknown, to cherish the questions as much as the answers. I realized that the unexplained wasn't something to be feared, but something to be celebrated, a reminder that the world is bigger, stranger, and more magical than we can ever fully understand. I became a storyteller, sharing the museum's wonders with anyone who would listen. I told tales of the spinning top, the feather, the gloves, the map, the key. I watched as others' eyes lit up with curiosity, as they began to see the world through the museum's lens. I saw the ripple of wonder spread, touching lives in ways I could never have imagined. And so, the museum lived on, not just in its hidden halls, but in the hearts and minds of those who believed in its magic. Its artifacts multiplied, its stories grew, its mysteries deepened. It became a living thing, shaped by the dreams and questions of all who entered. One evening, as I walked through the city, I caught a glimpse of the museum's facade reflected in a puddle. For a moment, I saw myself standing at the door, key in hand, ready to step inside once more. I smiled, knowing that the museum would always be there, waiting for the next seeker, the next question, the next story. The world is full of unexplained artifacts, objects, moments, memories that defy logic and reason. Some are hidden in museums, others in the corners of our lives, waiting to be discovered. All it takes is curiosity, a willingness to look beyond the surface, to ask the questions that have no easy answers. As I write this, the key sits on my desk, a silent invitation to return. The book of unwritten stories waits, its pages blank, ready to be filled. The museum is out there, somewhere, its doors open to those who seek, its halls echoing with the footsteps of the curious, the brave, the hopeful. If you ever find yourself standing before a building that doesn't quite belong, if you ever hear a story that makes you question what you know, if you ever feel the pull of the unexplained, follow it. Step inside. Ask your questions. Leave your mark. The world is not a puzzle to be solved, but a story to be lived. And the Museum of Unexplained Artifacts is just one chapter in that endless, wondrous tale.